That's good to know. Three quick announcements. One is that in this area, a person who was here early in the morning left a key card here. And so we're going to start at room 201 and just start checking it and see which one it is. There's 11 floors in the building. If that doesn't work, then tomorrow it's going to be a door prize. But if you don't care about it, that's fine. An announcement from Dr. McKinsey about TNTESOL tomorrow. For members, you will receive an email at 7 a.m. that includes the budget report, meeting notes, and a link for the member-at-large voting. Is that correct, Abasi? 7 a.m. Chris? Yes or no? Are they not in here? All right. So that you have time to review that. That's required before we hold our business meeting, which will be the right before lunch tomorrow. I would also just like to encourage people. Here's the conference password, Wi-Fi password. We'll put that back a little bit later in case you didn't get it. But I would also like people to take a look at our online program, which is this TNTESOL2018.sced.com. And I just want to show you why that's a good thing to do. Let me switch the screen here for just a second, Adam, just so I can do that. All right. Okay. I'll switch back just a second. Okay, it will look like this. This is where all of our sessions are listed, and whether you sign up for an account and log in, that's up to you. You can still view it. When you do sign up, though, for an account, you'll be able to do things like keep track of your schedule. You'll be able to do some more interactive features for it. For example, we are moving through the day, and we've wrapped up a dive into accountability. You'll notice that things that were on earlier, as the day moves through, it'll keep track of where we are in terms of real time. You can still go back and review things. For Dr. McQueen's address this morning, I'll convert that to a PDF, and then I will upload it to there so that we can have that. Adams and Evans as well, I'll convert to a PDF. That'll be done here in just a while, probably around lunchtime. That should be posted there. If you would look at the link for Evan's presentation, for example, it says, click here to provide feedback for Evan's presentation. So I was able to link what he had put on the screen there, that really long thing, so that you can click on that and do that. I think you can do that whether or not you register for an account or not. But the reason you might want to register for it is you can also give feedback, real quick feedback, just a smiley face, not feeling so good face, and not very good face, and give that person some feedback. And I'll be glad to forward that on to people as we get that. And this is for from now on for the rest of the conference. So I just wanted to encourage people to make use of that. All right. There you go.
Okay, a couple of things I want to let you know, a couple of announcements before I introduce Adam. We do have the water stations set up. If they run out, let us know. After lunch, immediately after lunch, we will do a Q&A session. So if you're 5 minutes from finishing your burger or whatever, don't dash out the door and miss those last luscious bites. Know that, we'll be doing a Q&A. At the same time, if you have questions you really want answered, usually the Q&A goes quite well, and we won't be repeating that again, except right at the very afternoon we might have some time. We also have the parking lot, and I see some questions on it, and Katie and I will collect those soon and begin to think about them. And that's all the announcements I have. And I am delighted to announce to you and introduce Adam Rollins. Adam has made a lot of my wishes over the years come true just in the last couple of years. Doesn't seem to matter what I say. I wish you could analyze, and he says, okay, we can do that. So a lot of the good information that we have coming out of the department is through the Department of Data and Research, and Adam is a part of that, a very necessary part for ESL. Adam, thank you for being here with us.
Swapping that out. All right. I thought I put yours up on the screen here. So.
Thank you, Jan, for introducing me. Thank you for inviting me. And thank you all for having me. As Jan said, I'm part of the relatively newly formed division of data and research. Is this too loud? That's good. Part of the newly formed division of data and research, and we used to be part of Evan's accountability division. I think they grouped us primarily based on introverted traits and overall nerdiness. We don't necessarily do similar things, and so eventually they restructured and we became our own division. And we have two teams, the data use team and the research team. I'm on the research team, so I'm going to talk primarily about that part of it. But we also have the data use side that I'll touch on a couple things as well. And I should note, if we were to look at my WIDA scores here, you would see an extremely low score for speaking. So just bear with me. This is not, I'm used to spreadsheets, so please just bear with me. So we try to support the ESL team at the department in a variety of ways through these two teams. One piece that we are developing for the ESL team at the department that is for their use is an internal dashboard for them so that they can easily pull visualizations like the ones you just saw Evan present with real-time data. And that's not something that you will ever interface with directly, but that is something that we hope will make lives better for everyone. Better data, it saves everybody a lot of heartache. And so if they're able to easily pull reports on how many students are being coded incorrectly in a certain way, with it, then they're able to get that feedback to the people who can make those corrections and make everybody's lives a little easier. And I have a quick example of how that can directly impact you as teachers. When I was teaching at Glencliff, I was an English teacher, not an ESL teacher, but I was teaching at Glencliff High School. So I was preparing for a parent conference with a parent of a student who is an English learner, and so I looked at the data that I had available, and I saw that the home language is Igbo, and so I spent far too long Googling Igbo and trying to find an Igbo translator and things like that, only to have the parent arrive and be equally confounded by what Igbo would be. So the data that was inaccurate. That was not the student's home language. So little things like that I doubt Jan will be pulling the Igbo report weekly, but she might, for example, be able to report back to you if you have students in your district who are coded as speaking English as their home language. If they're EL students, that could cause some confusion. So these are things that we can start to clear up along the way. We also have a product, or you can call it a product, that will be available for district leaders soon, where district leaders will be able to access and drill down into their English learner data in ways that they've never been able to before. So not just, it's quite small, you probably can't read the graph at the bottom there, but your district leader will be able to click on their English learner box there and get more details about the proficiency rates of their English learners and how that compares to last year, for example. And then, as we talked about earlier, they'll be able to slice the data in different ways by looking at individual groups within their English learner population. So they'll be able to look at their economically disadvantaged English learners, their English learners with special needs, and be able to make decisions with that data in real time. We are also revising what was formerly known as the report card, which is the public-facing data download piece that anyone in the public can access. and whereas you previously would just be able to see, for example, a count of how many English learners were in a given school or district or statewide, you'll be able to see a more fine-grained cut of the data. For example, we'll be able to access things like the number of, the percentage of your English learners who are classified as long-term English learners, for example. Things that in the past have just been unknowns for people. You'll be able to access these in real time. So those are pieces that I contribute to, but I'm not deeply involved in on the data use side of our division. But my role as a research analyst has different components that help support the ESL team at the department in different ways. One of which is to facilitate relationships with external researchers so that they can produce research that's actionable to us in Tennessee. So I'm happy that we have Ella Joshi, who's, she should be here somewhere. Raise your hand, Ella. She's in the back. She's our new external partner through the Tennessee Education Research Alliance at Vanderbilt. So next year, it'll probably be her speaking at the conference and sharing some fascinating findings with us that she was able to do. The three things that I'm gonna spend a little bit of time here talking about that I'm directly involved in are surveys that we do. We survey our district leaders annually, and then we also have our annual Tennessee Educator Survey, which we develop. We conference with the ESL team as we develop those survey items, and we have the intentionality of being able to get that information back to them so that your voices can be heard by them through that survey. And I'm also going to talk about how the research team provides data visualizations to the ESL team and to the state board so that it can inform their decision of where to set exit criteria with the WIDA. We don't set the criteria, but we provide them with the information that they request so that they can make an informed decision in that regard. And finally, I'll talk about, as Jan said, I'm able to set aside some of my time for just on-demand research questions that she has that we can answer with the data that we already have available at the state. And so I'll give an example of the latest analysis that we did with her, looking at our long-term English learners. So first, let's talk about the surveys. So every year we survey our district leaders in around November. If any of you are district leaders, watch your inbox. This last year, we, for the first time ever, had a module on that survey that was specifically dedicated to capturing the experience of English learners in districts from the district perspective. And so we worked with the team to develop items that could inform decisions for them that they were making this last year. So one piece, for example, was about how districts are using individual learning plans. And so we were able to find out that about half of districts already have individual learning plans that they use in their districts, although a subset of those who do don't use them consistently throughout the district. So they have a product, they have a template, but it's just sort of given out to teachers to use at their discretion. But then we also had half of our districts, approximately, who responded to our survey who said that they don't have any formalized process or template that they use within their district to help ESL teachers create individual learning plans. And even some said that they don't intend to ever provide that. As the ESL team was developing the ILP template that they came out with last year, we were able to keep that in mind, that for many ESL teachers, this would be their only resource. And so we did that very intentionally. We also asked those who do have ILPs to give us a copy, and so that we could look at all those and develop that template to the best of our ability. And we also found out that even those districts who do provide some template or process for doing an ILP, it's they leave it, the responsibility is on the ESL teacher. And so we knew that this was going to be something that would directly help you, the ESL teachers. We also asked about what districts saw as their top 3 professional learning priorities for that year, in no particular order. So each district was able to select up to 3 choices, and by far the biggest need that district leaders see, this may or may not be what you see as the ESL teachers in your district, but what district leaders saw as the biggest need for professional learning was about getting a general educator knowledge and buy-in about how to serve, about serving English learners. I'm seeing some nods from you. ILPs were also a big priority, and using RTI to serve your English learners was another big priority. We also asked about see, these surveys are a chance for us to get those data pieces that don't just exist in our data system, you know. So we took this opportunity to ask about how districts continue to monitor their students as they're in transitional status and as they move on beyond transitional status into former English learner status. The well, not the majority, but quite a few districts who responded said that they use grades or TN-Ready as their metric that they monitor as they continue to do that. Others use their RTI data that they're collecting anyway for all students. Others talked about some form of survey that's sent out to teachers, or survey that's even given out to the students as they continue to move into their former English learner role. But ultimately, a vast majority, now this was a write-in field, so we just sort of condensed their responses as best we could here, but ultimately, a vast majority leave that responsibility to the ESL teachers to continue to check in on these students, as opposed to putting the onus on the general education teacher to notify someone when they see their former English learners starting to struggle. Last year, we also added our first ever question on the annual Tennessee Educator Survey that goes out to all teachers and building administrators, that captured something specifically about teachers who are serving English learner students. And so we asked this of the K-3 teachers in Tennessee. How many of you have English learner students in your class? About half, of course, do, and if we were to look at one of those charts that Evan showed you where each district has their own bar, you would see a lot of, I'm sure you'd see a lot of districts where all their teachers said yes, and you'd see a lot of districts where very few, if any, teachers said yes. And that 1% who don't know, of course you'd like that to be 0, but 1% is pretty low. That's one of those, let's hope we don't get 25% on that, you know, kind of questions. Otherwise, we got a lot of work to do, right? And then, so for those who said that they do serve at least some English learner students, we had some follow-up questions. We asked, do you have access to the data that you need in order to inform instruction for these students? And you see the blue bar there is the response of ESL teachers. The red bar is the response of general education teachers. And you see, of course, you would expect the ESL teachers would have more access to more data on the EL students, but also a good chunk of the general education teachers said that they have moderate or great access to data that they need in order to inform instruction. Our second follow-up question to that was, do you have access to the collaborators that you need in order to help you modify instruction for your English learner students? And again, you would expect that to be highest among ESL teachers, and it is, but it's also quite a few, 70% or more, who among the general education teachers who have moderate or great access to collaborators for their EL students. This is a question that was on the core part of the survey. We asked about your professional learning needs. We didn't have any that specifically called out English learners specifically, but we had a couple of questions that were similar. We asked about, are you satisfied with the quantity, the quality, or both, or neither, of the professional learning that you have experienced this year in these different areas? So we asked about working with students from diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds. 2 out of 3 satisfied with both the quantity and the quality that they've received. This is across all grades, and this is English ESL teachers and general ed teachers combined. And we asked about your professional learning that helps you meet the needs of all learners, and closer to half are satisfied with both the quantity and the quality. Now, so we have other items on the survey that I pulled out here that the questions were not designed specifically to capture anything about ESL teachers or English learners, but what we can do after we get the data is then cut it and look at how ESL teachers responded versus how general ed teachers responded. And so let's play a little game with the next 3 slides where you try to predict whether ESL teachers were more likely or less likely. So give me a thumbs up or thumbs down to do certain things. So the first one is, do you think that ESL teachers spend more or less instructional time on discipline? More or less instructional time on discipline? I see a lot of thumbs down, and you're right, substantially so. So we asked, they had several options. How much instructional time do you spend dealing with discipline? 5% or less, 2 out of 3 ESL teachers reported spending 5% or less of their instructional time dealing with discipline, compared to only 42% of general education teachers. So you obviously had a good beat on that already. But I wonder, though, how many people in your buildings would be surprised to see that, you know? I wonder if the perception in your communities, in your schools, in your districts is the same as that ESL teachers actually have to spend less time on discipline than their general ed teacher peers. So the next one, give me another more or less. Do you think that ESL teachers are more or less likely to feel like they have access to a group of colleagues with whom they can meet regularly to reflect on instructional practice? Right again. Less likely to say that they always have access to a group of colleagues who they can reflect on instructional practice with. I bet you have some theories on why that is. After reading many of your comments on the survey, I have a good guess. It's because you're spread across so many buildings. Is that fair to say in many of your cases? Yes, I saw a lot of comments on those of you who responded on the survey. We have one question at the end of the annual educator survey where it's tell us anything you want. So we actually, oh yeah, those are fun. We do read every single one of them, and we do some key. I saw that. We do some keyword searches to try to pull out. We know when we want to know, for example, how many comments were about ESL or something like that. And so I read through all those recently, and that was something that I saw coming up over and over again was being spread across buildings or just being spread thin is an issue. Last one, more or less. Are ESL teachers more or less likely to believe that teachers at, here's the wording of the question, so keep that in mind, more or less likely to believe that teachers at this school adjust their instruction based on cultural differences in the classroom? So this is you talking about other teachers at your school, however you interpret your school. Less likely to believe that teachers in their school are adequately adjusting instruction based on cultural differences. Of course, that's quite different from how the general ed teachers responded. So they have a different perception of what they're doing than you do, even in the same building. But these, when I started cutting these questions this way, it occurred to me that doing this type of analysis is not really adequate to capture to get your feedback, to make sure your voices are heard. So one of the things that I would like to do is push for some more questions on the survey that are specific to English learners and ESL teachers. And so we often conference in the development of these surveys with the ESL team at the state, but I'm wondering, since we have some mics here now, if you have any ideas of what could we ask on the survey that would help your voice be heard in ways that are important to you. Or you can just shout them out. That's fine.
Okay. Are ESL teachers assigned additional duties at a higher rate than others?
Okay. All right, I heard some amens. It's a good one. Could you give me some quick examples of what should be the option choices there? What are some of these additional duties that we should ask about? Bus, lunch, sub, testing, proctoring. Okay, that's good stuff. Any other ideas?
Kind of monitor that decrease, hopefully, as the decrease of ratio between teacher and or student and teacher has, because that came up with how effective we can be, really.
Mm-hmm. And that's why your participation in the survey is important, because your responses are confidential, they're not anonymous. So when you give us that feedback of how many schools you're serving, for example, that's when we can then look at where are teachers being spread more thin, and then to your question earlier, how does that affect scores? So we can make that argument to stakeholders if we have that data. That's why your participation in the survey is important.
My question was, the data that you cut out over here, was that from the initial K3 data? And if it was only K3, why were the other teachers not asked? Because I teach middle school.
Good question. I was hoping nobody would ask. It came down to it was an error. It was an error. The EL question there was literally last second add, and it was probably on me to catch it in the final checking before the survey goes out. But there was a conditional thing that was put, in terms of the way it's actually distributed. There was a conditional put on that for some reason that I didn't catch that meant that question only appeared to K-3 teachers. So that's just my mistake.
My question was something maybe geared towards classroom teachers about if they have resources to accommodate, and then there could be different options for like their EL students or their transitional students. Like if they know what accommodating means or what modifying instruction means, or if they have resources to do that.
Gotcha.
So I hand up over there. There.
That's good. Oh, I'm sorry. I was encouraging shouting.
Sorry. Okay. So in terms of perhaps collecting some data on the kinds of state trainings that we might want to have in the future, I think it would be really, it would give us some insight across the state to have a question related to collaborative teaching and whether the teacher is teaching in one or more classes in the general ed classroom, and whether they've had training with that gen ed teacher on how to co-teach. I've seen it arise as an issue both in special education and in ESL, and I think that it's an area that I would really like to get some data on so that maybe we could then have a platform to say this is something that we need some state training on a wider scale.
Excellent. Let's get one more maybe. And then I'll have my email at the end. You can just email me ideas or grab me
sometimes
afterward.
questions are a little bit silly, but just curious, does it impact the student when the student is being taught like in a regular environment, classroom-wise, with Promethean boards and things like that, or in a closet, in between two noisy classrooms?
Okay.
So, just wondering.
Perfect.
You really want to see the closet question on there.
You can see that survey question, right? You have access to A, Promethean board, B, closet. C, all the above. All right. Like I said, I will have my email at the end. I'll be around later today, so just grab me or email me later if you have more ideas. That might have been the first time that we've first gathered input from teachers on how to develop a survey module. So I'm glad we're breaking new ground. Another thing that I do for the ESL team annually is, and I've only been at the department 2 years, but one thing that I've done in the past is some visualizations of data that they can bring to the state board, who ultimately sets exit criteria every year for the WIDA. And so I'm going to show you some of the ways that we've shown them, the way that we show them the data so that they can help make a good decision. So this takes some explaining, and I think this year, am I going to be the one sharing this with the state board this year, I think? So this will be a good practice for me to try to explain what this means. So what you're seeing here on the far right, the EO column, you're seeing the distribution of TN Ready scale scores. In this case, it's in math. So we're looking at only third graders, math, TN Ready scale scores. That's the distribution on the far right for English-only students. Each box plot moving to the left of that is a distribution of math TN Ready scale scores at each WIDA level that was achieved just, what, 2 months prior, on the WIDA. And so when we look at these distributions, you can see where the bulk of the scores are. The box, if you think of the box as a flat version of a bell curve, right? The box part of the box plot represents the thickest part of the bell curve, so that's where the bulk of the scores are within that box. And so what you're looking for here is where do at what WIDA level do the EL boxes start to align with the English-only box? And the line, the red line, is the median scale score for English-only students at that grade level in that content. And so it's an easy way to look at it and make a judgment in terms of where they seem to align. We can do some other checks that are not as easy to visualize that can back up the scores that we might arrive at with this through this visualizing of the data. And sometimes we're asked to follow up with some more advanced analysis. So this is not the only thing that we'd be basing the score on, but this shows you, for example, in grade 3, what would appear to be where students are able to achieve at a similar level as their English-only peers in math. And so we repeat this for each grade cluster, each WIDA grade cluster, and each content. And what you see as you repeat this over and over again is sometimes particularly when we, as students get older, they have to score higher on the WIDA before their scale scores start to align with their English-only peers. And then we do the same for ELA, for example. And you see that, especially in ELA, you start to see where we need higher WIDA levels in order to achieve it the same. Sorry, yes? The grade 3, okay. And then in grades 4, 5 ELA. Grades 6, 8. And 9, 12. And as Evan was saying, of course, the WIDA is undergoing a lot of shifts, has undergone a lot of shifts in the recent years as well. Question?
Yes, I just want to make sure I'm understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So are you saying that on their WIDA access report, that for them, they should score, they need to have scored a 1.9 or reach that level in order for them to reach the TN Ready?
Not that they needed to, because as you see, there are students even all the way down at a 3.5 who are scoring equivalent to the median of an English-only peer, right? So it's not like it's impossible, but of course, we have to make a decision that's informed by as many students as possible. So that's why we're looking primarily at the box where the bulk of the scores are to make the best choice possible. Yes. Oh.
We're trying to, when
considered pulling data points that only look at the WIDA scores for reading and writing to make that correlation instead of taking into consideration the whole composite score, which has speaking and listening components, which are not part of TN Ready?
Yes, we can do that, and we do. I don't have those to show you here, but of course, when you're looking at just the reading and writing in relation to the ELA TN Ready scores, for example, you see that it generally follows the same trajectory as composite. And then, of course, we're able to look at each grade level and each content area this way, and then we do some weighting to try to arrive at a cut score that works best for everyone. So we weight by how many students we actually have in each grade cluster and in each content area. And you see that, last year, this is one of the things that informed the 4.2 cut score that we arrived at after WIDA changed its standards to a more rigorous assessment. So we had to figure out where do we set our new cuts. And you see that this year the data it's fairly similar, but it does point to possibly a need to raise exit criteria. So that this is, we've not made this presentation to the board yet, and of course it's a iterative process. It's not just a one-time discussion and then the decision being made. Yep.
Has there been any discussion around different exit criteria for different grade level bands, if the equivalent score is different in different grade level bands?
That's something that that does come up in discussion. The concern there, at least from my perspective, and of course I'm not the person who would make this decision at all, but when I look at the data, my concern would be that we're going to put some kids into a situation where they're constantly chasing and never able to reach, because what this would suggest is that a higher cut score is needed as the students get older, and then it becomes more and more difficult to attain that. You also have to think about, what are you incentivizing if people are aware that if we don't exit this kid this year, next year they're going to have even less of a chance. You have to think about what are the unintended consequences of having that awareness out there. So there are a lot of things to think about, and believe me, we've had these discussions, and of course the state board is ultimately the people who decide. But we try to bring whatever data they need in order to make that decision. The last thing that I'll talk about is, as Jan said, we do, on the research team, we do some on-demand research for different divisions and teams within the department. And so I'm the person on the team who Jan can call for I don't want to say last minute, but but urgent data crunching, urgent questions that need answers to make a decision in the moment, or to inform a communication that has to go out, for example, like the long-term English learner report that came out recently. I didn't write the report, but as I said, I provided some of the analysis that informed what went out in that report. So I'll share with you sort of what went into that. So the first question, if you're talking about long-term English learners, is who are your long-term English learners? And it's sort of one of these things that you can sort of think yourself in circles if you think about it too long, because a long-term English learner is defined as a student who's beginning their 7th year of ESL services. So at what point do they become then a long-term English learner? Because they take the WIDA assessment the prior year. If if the next year was their 7th year and they achieved their exit score on the WIDA the prior year, then the next year they're not to become a long-term English learner. They would not have that label, but you base that on what they did the prior year to determine that. So you have to do a lot of data checking to see who exactly is your long-term English learner group each year. And then, of course, some of those students who you would flag based on their prior year WIDA scores, that student is about to become a long-term English learner. Some of them don't become long-term English learners because they don't continue on in Tennessee schools. They graduate, they move away, what have you. So who are your long-term English learners? It depends on when you're asking that question, is the point that I'm trying to make there. And so the long-term English learners are a large portion of our EL students in grades 6 through 12. Any guesses on what label you could apply to a bulk of those who are not long-term English learners in grades 6 through 12? Recently arrived English learners is a bulk of those other students. There's not a ton of students who are EL students who are in grades 6 through 12 who don't have one of those labels. There are some, but there's not a ton of those. So a large portion of the students who we compare to here who are in grades 6 through 12 are recently arrived. And this is in the report. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that, I encourage you to. But this is certainly something that we need to be aware of. That when we talk about our long-term English learners, a much larger portion of those students are those dually identified students we were talking about earlier today. So they have an IEP. And when you look at their disability, their primary disability on their IEP, you see that almost 2 out of 3, their disability is specific learning disability. Does anybody know what the most common specific disability is within that category of specific learning disabilities? Dyslexia or some reading impairment. And so that's something we'll talk about. We'll see some more data in a couple slides that you want to think back to that. And also language impairment, quite high among the LTELs and proportionately much higher among that population than among the English-only peers of in the same grades. And then other health impairment, probably the most common disability within that category would be ADD or ADHD, things like that. When we look at how successful our long-term English learners are at exiting, they are equally successful at exiting as their grade peers. But keep in mind, many of those grade peers are recently arrived English learners. And so, you would hope that exit rate would be quite a bit higher among those students. But both have a substantially lower exit rate compared to English learners in the lower grades. As Evan showed you earlier, we know that a vast majority of our EL population begins in kindergarten and begins to exit generally 3rd or 4th grade, and then those who are still in by 6th grade, they really struggle to exit, as we see here. And in fact, there are some other ways that I've looked at the data where you can sort of see that long-term English learners spend several years just sort of hovering at a certain level where year to year they're just as likely to go down as they are to go up. And then of course, some eventually do break through and exit, but many, it takes a long time of hovering before they get there. So when you look by indicator, you see that their strengths are actually similar to those students in grades 1 through 5. But of course, they're not making the same progress year to year as those students are. So even though on average their performance is similar, they're not necessarily as likely to make the progress needed to exit within a given year. And their average performance on each indicator is quite a bit higher than their peers. Again, why? Because those students are much more likely to be recently arrived, so they're coming in with generally lower skills, but then they're making much more year-to-year growth than their long-term English learner peers. And last, we looked at, so among students who do exit, what happens? Among those who do successfully exit in a given year, what growth did they make that allowed them to exit on average? And what we see is it takes a big push in reading. Their growth in the other categories is adequate to get the composite score needed to exit. But if they didn't have that huge surge in reading, they wouldn't have exited. So it takes a breakthrough in those reading skills in order to meet the exit, and that's not incredibly different from what we see when we look at their non-LTL peers in grades 6-12. They also exit by making a big push in reading, and of course this is just among those who do successfully exit. So it's a small group here that we're talking about, but this is what happened on average when they exited. And we also see large reading growth is what it takes to exit in grades 1 through 5. So reading seems to be that last skill that has to have a breakthrough in order to achieve that exit that they want. But you see that for example, in grades 1 through 5, they're making much more growth in other categories as well. They're not relying solely on that huge push in reading, because they're also making large gains in writing the same year and listening, much larger than their long-term English learners in the upper grades. So I made some notes. This is sort of an on-demand analysis, as I said. One of the things that we also do on the research team is once a year we have a big powwow where we pitch ideas for big projects that usually result in a report, a more in-depth research effort. Where we bring in qualitative components. We're not just relying on data that we have at our computers and things like that. And so I have always tried to make a case for an EL project that would be a big project, a big report that we could push towards. But I've never won that argument. So if you have questions, ideas for that, I would love to hear it. I made some notes of things that I heard throughout the day that seemed like good candidates for that type of research, as in best serving, diagnosing, and providing services for duly served English learners. That's what I heard several times today. I also heard connecting services or curriculum to student outcomes. That's a wonderful idea. Of course, that requires partners. We would have to partner with you. We would have to visit your classrooms. We would have to find out what services you're providing. We also have to tread lightly when we're talking about curriculum. We have legislative restrictions. We're not allowed to present any research or anything that would say one curriculum is better than another. We're not allowed to weigh in that kind of thing, but we can certainly tie it to specific services that are being provided, or resources, is what I heard earlier today as well. So those are some of the notes I took. If you have other ideas, comments, or questions, I would love to hear them. I think we're running low on time, so don't feel like you have to ask it now. As I said, I'll be around later this afternoon if you'd rather share it with me then.
If you have questions, please go to the mic. Yeah.
Hi, I have a question about the long-term definition. I teach at a high school, and we occasionally will get a student who may have been born in the United States, may have been here through kindergarten or first grade, and then go back to the parent's home country. And in our data record-keeping system, it asks for data first entered U.S. schools. It asks for data first ESL service. Do we keep track of these kids that then show back up as 10th graders, basically cannot read or write in English? They weren't here long enough to do that. May have some verbal skills. Are they long-term learners? Are they not? They're not newcomers?
And that's a really good question. The date we use is date first enrolled in U.S. school. That's the date we currently use. So
we're getting more and more kids with big gaps.
Okay.
We get gaps when they come from other countries. They show up age appropriate for high school, but yet they've only been through 3rd or 4th grade. That we're used to handling, but we're getting a lot of these kids that are having gaps in their English education because they're going back to their home countries and then coming back to us as high school kids. It just might be something we might want to track better.
yes, that's great to know. That's not something I personally had ever thought of, and so yes, we will have to think about the that ultimately comes down to a data entry question. You know, do we need another column to better track that, or do we need guidance around what that date should be for that circumstance? It's a good point. I'm glad
If
you
you
mentioned
would keep down your noise so that we can hear the questions, it would certainly be appreciated.
So I realize you can't make curriculum recommendations and that there are limitations, but I'm wondering with the data that you're collecting now, if there's a way to kind of connect the dots, triangulate a bit. For example, my question is, we know that with those LTs that are coming to us and they have that great gain in reading, that push, as you said several times, has kind of helped them mostly to get over. So if we're looking, we know those kids, you know those kids, and then if we look at the questions that you're asking across the state, questions which I think should also include collaboration time, like how much collaboration time do you have specifically with the ESL teacher, or how much collaboration time do you get to have scheduled into your day, approved by principal, with your gen ed teacher. So collaboration time specifically within the schedule. I think that would be a great way to see how much time. But anyway, looking at those questions, the ones that are flagging to you, if they match up with the kid, okay, now what are our questions? How much time are they getting? Again, very specifically for our middle and high school kids. How much time are they getting with the ESL teacher? Are the techniques that we're using, are they EL in nature? Is it coming from an SLA point of view, or is it a reading intervention approach coming from the reading specialist? I mean, I think connecting those dots and kind of not necessarily saying this is what we recommend, but this is what we're seeing. So in these cases, with these kiddos, we know that they're doing X, Y, and Z. This is kind of a perfect balance. And then that would just inform us as a state and as the EL teacher in the school to say to our principals, okay, we know this works, so can we get the schedule set up for our kids?
And that's a fantastic idea, and that is the kind of question that would require a very in-depth study And for that, we would need partners. We would need
Right.
your involvement. You know, we would need to have enough data about what services are being provided to individual students so that we can, and enough individual students, so that we can then make that relationship. And so that would be a big undertaking, and it would require your involvement, but that's the kind of idea that I can pitch and try to get moving. That's a great idea.
If there are no other questions, we're going to let Adam off the hook for a few minutes. And please be back from lunch at 1 o'clock.